I'd like to call to order the Town Council study session on Wednesday, February 23rd, 2022 at 6 p.m. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mr. Troxel, would you take roll call, please?
Yes. Madam President, Robin Arvanitis.
Here.
Councilman Tom Schmidt.
Here.
Councilman Kevin Conley.
Present.
Councilman Caleb Johnson.
Present.
Town Manager Bob Volkman.
Here.
Director of Operations Jim Gorman.
Here.
Public Works Director Mr. Andrew Hansen. We have Mr. Jeff Hewitt, who's a project administrator. Robbie Hansen in IT. And we have also then Mr. Ben Carnahan from AECom.
Thank you. Our one item on the agenda is the discussion of the Oak Street Scoping Project Report. Mr. Carnahan?
Thank you. I thought I was going to be in one of your normal council meetings, so I made my presentation nice and brief. So we can make it a conversation and you can ask me any questions you want. I realize you guys have already seen the draft scoping report, so maybe it's good that I'm just going to hit the highlights anyways. A little bit about me, since most of you are just meeting me. I have 28 years experience in the transportation industry in Indiana. I'm a Purdue grad, and I started working for INDOT right out of college, and then ever since 25 of those 28 years, I've worked for consultants, in the last 5 years for AECom. I did help Andrew Habel with the last submission of the draft report. I provided quality control and read it over to make sure that everything that we were saying was in accordance with Indiana and INDOT design statutes. And unfortunately, Andrew left AECom late last year. And so we felt like I was the natural person to take over this project to the completion. So, I think you all know this, so I'll go very quickly through these two slides, but the purpose and need of this project is to provide an east-west connection across the Norfolk Southern track that divides a lot of your east-west routes, and you have limited crossings in that case, and some of those are at-grade crossings, and this would provide a crossing that would be not blocked by train traffic, since it would be grade separated.
Mr. Carnahan, could you provide Mr. Getzoff with a packet as well?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I got another copy. Hang on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So we're talking about connecting the two stubs of Oak Street across the Norfolk Southern property. So the proposed roadway typical section would be as shown up there on the slide with two 12-foot lanes, curb or gutter, and an 8-foot shared use paths separated by 5 feet from the back of the curb. You can see that north is to the right on that drawing, so the shared use path would be on the south side of the road. And then the conceptual layout plan of the project has the roadway extending there from the Lowe's, moving a little bit north around the BP property, where and crossing Norfolk Southern, and then curving back to the south to connect into the existing Oak Street. We've done the traffic modeling for the project, and both of these new intersections that would be created would qualify for traffic signals. They would warrant traffic signals. So traffic signals is included in the cost of the project that we're talking about today. Of course, on US 41, you'd have to work with INDOT and convince them that it's warranted for a traffic signal.
That's already there. We already got traffic signal.
Is that does that have a signal there?
Yeah, now it's in there.
At Oaken.
Okay,
At
'cause of-
Oaken 41, we already have one.
Okay, because of Lowe's?
Because of the Chick-fil-A that went in.
Well, because of that whole
That
development.
development there.
Yeah, those have a lot of
Hey,
traffic.
Ben, so we're going, the proposed project is to go underneath, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll get into that more in the presentation. That's really the heart of what we got to talk about here. So I'm going to hit kind of the highlights of what the major risk factors and cost factors are on this project. And one of the big ones is land acquisition. So you've got around 6 acres of land that needs to be acquired from 3 parcels, as well as an easement from Norfolk Southern. And we have estimated that cost to be about $1.22 million. And that estimate is not based on appraisals or any professional real estate appraisers. It's based on the property's tax value and the proportion of the acreage that we would like to acquire from each parcel. So there's some risk involved around that number, that it could end up being different when you actually get into land appraisal, but that's the best information that we have available to us at this time. You guys probably deal with this on some of your projects, but real estate appraisers don't want to really put themselves out there and give you an estimate until they're actually doing the real appraisal.
Sure.
So we usually use the tax value as a guide in that case. Utility involvement is also going to be pretty serious on this project. I'm sure you guys, being up here in the region, are aware of this. I've done quite a few projects up here, and these petroleum pipelines are always, they make the projects interesting, is a diplomatic way to say it. So we've got 5 petroleum pipelines within the proposed right-of-way of where we want to put this road. So west of the railroad, running parallel to the tracks, you've got Wolverine Pipeline with an 18-inch diameter, Explorer Pipeline, and then east of the railroad, you've got Marathon Pipeline, and there's 2 of them with a 12 and a 16-inch diameter, and then the BP Pipeline. The BP Pipeline also takes a turn and runs east-west parallel to the right-of-way, approximately just south of where we're proposing to put the road. Because, you know, they have that parcel there that's right by the bridge. So those are always a challenge. We know the guidelines on all these pipelines. We've worked with them before. We know what kind of cover they want to see under the road. They typically want at least 4 feet under the pavement. They want at least 3 foot under the ditches. And all of that, according to the preliminary survey and the preliminary layout that we've done, is possible. So we don't see any problems here, any major relocations or costly relocations here. What we might run into with some of the pipelines is they'll want to encase them under the roadway, but they can do that with kind of a clamshell that they'll, instead of having to relay the pipe or any kind of costly work like that, they would just put their clamshell casing around it and it actually snaps tight around it, and then they've got a casing under the road for the future if they ever want to replace that pipe. So we've had, specifically with BP and Marathon, I've been able to successfully negotiate that with some projects I did in Hammond earlier in my career where they did that clamshell casing. Saved a lot of money on the project, as opposed to them wanting to, you know, replace all the pipe and put in all new pipe. So that's something that we'll have to, you know, once the project becomes a reality, we'd have to initiate contact and coordination with those folks and work through all those details. Anytime you guys got questions, feel free to stop me. So as I said, the real key, the real expensive thing here is the bridge construction under railroad traffic. Norfolk Southern wants as little interruption as possible. And so we've got to come up with some innovative ways to construct this bridge. So we looked at three options. We looked at a shoe fly, which is a railroad term that you may or may not be familiar with. But basically what a shoe fly is a railroad bypass. So the red line that's drawn on there on the slide would be a bypass of the area where the bridge would be. And so the railroad would follow around that bypass while the bridge is being constructed. It also has a connection into a Y down at the bottom that makes it a little bit more complicated and a little bit more expensive. And then, so you first construct the shoe fly, divert the railroad traffic over onto the shoe fly, and then build the bridge, reinstall the tracks on the previously existing alignment, demolish the shoe fly, take it back out again, and then you can build the rest of the road around it because your bridge will be in place. So this is something that's done all the time on railroad projects. This is a tried and true method. It's a little bit expensive, but it's one of the ones that we know that this will be a viable option. So the second option that we've analyzed is called a secant, which is basically drilled shafts. So this is a multi-step process in the interest of brevity and not putting you guys to sleep with my engineering details. What you do with the secant is you drill these shafts tightly spaced together, and then you build in, so that there's a plan view of the shafts there that you would drill on either side of the track. The track is shown in the green right there. There's a section view of those shafts going down in the ground. And then over a 24 to 48 hour period, you close the track, which Norfolk Southern's probably gonna not like too much, but it's even in the shoe fly, when you're making the connection over between the shoe fly, you've got a short closure necessary in either case. But in 24 to 48 hours, they'd work round the clock, they'd pull the tracks, they would slide in a pre-assembled bridge deck onto those piers that they've drilled. They would pour a cap using high early strength. As soon as that cap is hard enough, they would slide in that structure, build the tracks back across the new bridge, and open it back up. But it would require round-the-clock work, and drilling these shafts is pretty involved as well. But this is a viable option. We've done this over on some railroads in Illinois within the last few years, and it was a successful method and worked out with the railroad just fine. And then the third option, which is kind of 3A, 3B, and 3C, but that's trenchless alternatives, basically tunneling. So we looked at three options. There's a jacked box, so you would take a reinforced concrete box and you would jack it underneath the railroad, and you could see there's a picture of a box with a cutting edge on the front. You could see behind the guy in the orange the actual box, and then that cutting head sits on the front of it, and they push it through. And but the problem here is there's not a lot of experience doing this in the U.S., and this would also be a very large box, much bigger than is shown in this picture. This is really good when you're doing drainage structures. It's not so good when you want to put a whole roadway with a shared use path next to it underneath the railroad, because the hydraulic capacity of the equipment to be able to push that box through the soil, not too many contractors have that. It's not something that's done a whole lot here in the U.S. It's more common in other countries. And so we kind of looked at this, and then we decided to eliminate it. So the second option to do trenchless is what's called the sequential excavation method, which is similar but requires less equipment. So that's where they would excavate just a few feet. You can kind of see the ribs in that picture where they excavate a few feet, pull back. They lay in a lattice of reinforcement, shoot it with shotcrete that's got high early strength, and so it strengthens really quick, and then they move forward, do another 3 or 4 feet, do it again, do it again, do it again. That's the whole sequential part, is it's a sequence, and you go through, and they would do this larger than we need, and it would end up, it wouldn't look like this when you're done from the inside. It would look like a box from the inside, and the leftover areas would be filled with grout. So you have to over excavate a little bit on this. This is a completely suitable method that we think would work from a tunneling standpoint.
The 2 lanes?
Yeah, we would,
Right.
our plan is, and our estimate as shown, and when I get to the estimate in this, is the entire, the typical section would remain the same underneath the railroad. So you would have the 2 lanes, you would have the 5-foot separation, the 8-foot path, the whole thing fits underneath, so.
Do we know how many trains a day Norfolk runs on that line?
There's not much traffic there anymore. A lot of the coal trains that went down to the generating station, but I think that's,
Four.
yeah, I think, yeah,
Isn't it 4 per day or something?
it's only a handful anymore.
Yeah. We have the report, it's in the back of the draft report, it has that information, I just don't have it at my fingertips.
Okay, we'll find that out.
Yeah. I don't have it
Thanks.
memorized, sorry. And then another popular method, this is kind of like the horizontal version of the secant, where we were talking about drilling the shafts. But in this case, they drill steel pipes horizontally, closely spaced, and then they slide in like a 3-sided structure or a pipe arch that slides in. You can see the pneumatic jacks holding it up there, and they slide that in, grout around it. The pipes don't show when you're done; they're buried. But this is a viable method as well. We've also done this over in Illinois. AECOM has designed one of these, and it's been constructed within the last few years. It worked out really well. And I think we would make a final decision during design which one of these, if we wanted to go tunneling, we'd have to make a final decision which one of these to select after we'd done all the soil borings and everything. There's nothing in the soil information that's available online for this area that would tell us that this is problematic for this location, but you do have to get very detailed soil information and make sure you don't run into anything unusual like peat or anything like that. You guys do have a lot of organic soils up here. Seems like I've almost every project I've done up here in the region with your neighbors have run into organic soils, so, but they're not usually very deep, so probably wouldn't impact us. So now we get to the fun part. So since the draft report, we have updated the cost like last week. And the reason I wanted to do that, I don't know if you guys have heard this or experienced it yourself, but we're seeing some inflation in prices. The LaPorte district in January did not sell about 1/3 of their projects because they were far enough over they'll sell it if it's within 10% of the engineer's estimate. These were more than 10% beyond the engineer's estimate. So we're seeing some inflation in prices in the construction industry. And so the software that we use pulls prices from NDOT's bids, and we were able to get the January bids and update these prices to the most recent information we got. So I also happen to be working on a design build right now with Walsh Construction, and they're complaining a lot because we bid the project last June. This is the last section of I-69 connecting to I-465, if you guys are familiar with that project. They bid the project last June. We're getting through the design now, and they're just getting ready to start construction, and they've seen prices in steel and concrete go pretty far up, and they're complaining about it as well. So land acquisition across all three alternates is the same. The engineering and design services varies based on the complexity of the various alternates, but they're all, with the exception of the tunneling, which requires a lot more geotech and a lot more effort, the other two are pretty close to each other. Railroad and utility, and also included in the engineering design services would be the right-of-way appraising and buyers and all that. So that's the services. So I just kind of threw that in there because typically that's subbed off of the engineering firm. Railroad and utility costs, so this includes their engineering, because the railroads want paid to do their own engineering. The utilities will probably want paid to do their own engineering too, because they're not on public property now, so they're going to want reimbursed. And then also the estimated cost of doing those clamshells and the things I talked about earlier that would be necessary. So those are the railroad and utility costs that I talked about. Construction cost is obvious. And then contingency, because we don't have geotech, because we don't have, we haven't been able to get the railroad to weigh in on this, we put a pretty healthy contingency on this, 30%. And so, as of right now, it looks like the secant option would be the most cost effective. The shoe fly is pretty close to that, percentage-wise, and the tunneling is pretty far out in third place. These are all current year costs. So if you guys went, for example, for LPA funding through the MPO, you know, we would have to inflate these costs because you're probably going to be in, what, the 2026 program at this point? Is the 2025 program for LPAs out up here? I know it's out for NDOT. Like, they're having us start engineering on the 2025 projects right now.
They're adopting the 2026 to 4 years in the future. We've got Kennedy Avenue projects that are in the outlying years and in the two.
Okay.
Nothing. NERC, our MPO is programmed out to 2020.
Okay. Now, the good news on that front is that the IIJA is going to add some more money in everybody's pockets. NDOT, the reports that I saw was NDOT would see a 30% increase in their budget from the IIJA bill. That's unofficial, that's just through industry sources. But, I think there's stipulations in this bill, I know there's stipulations in this bill that some of this has to come out to locals like you all. And so I'm thinking you're probably going to see a 30% increase in the LPA budgets too, which means there might be some wiggle room within that program budget because they might be looking to spend some more money that they weren't planning on. Let's keep our fingers crossed and hope.
Well, the other thing is it's debatable how well the project would score under a NERC scoring system, as to whether we qualify for federal money on it anyway. I don't think it's something that would be affordable for the town of Schererville without federal money. That's all in out years, and at this point in time, it'd be imprudent to try to predict what we could get through and get past at NERC.
Well, while we're on that subject, so the next steps are, based on any feedback you give me today, we will prepare the final report and deliver it to you all. And then, you know, like I just was talking about, trying to prepare for the next funding cycle. Now, I don't know, I'm less knowledgeable about NERC and how they score things, but I know that NDOT in general right now is very much focused on anything that is helping with creating jobs or business development. So is there any land that would be, is that an angle that we could market? Is there any land that would be opened up and be more suitable to development that you could, you know, use to kind of sell this to
Yeah.
NDOT and NERC?
Realistically, no.
No?
It's a connection point between the highway. It'd be a relief point for US 41 and traffic congestion, so, but, there again, I agree with Jeff. I mean, the only way you know how you point it is if you submit it.
Yeah.
That would be, that would be my recommendation, is that you at least put together a package and try to get it in and see whether you get anywhere.
Yeah, what's the downside of submitting it? Is there an obligation on our side financially? So,
Because submitting isn't really very costly, but, it goes through a vetting process with NERC, and, and they score, and then projects are awarded and added to the tip, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And so, and your long range, you're in line, so, let's say you get a project and you're successful, then it starts all over with funding. So you're probably looking at, realistically, what, maybe an 8 or 10 year funding cycle?
I wouldn't guess you would qualify for any NIPSCO funds before 2030.
Yeah.
The other thing too is NERC caps what they will allow in any given phase at 6 million. Now, given the new money that's coming in, the additional money Mr. Carter had talked about, we may see that go up. But under NERC rules, you can't spend more than 6 million. You can't be awarded more than $6 million in NERC money in any given year anyway.
And this is not a project, you could phase the bridge portion, but the bridge has got to go in one phase. You could phase the road construction, after that, but the road construction is,
the road construction's the cheap part.
the
Yeah.
road construction is the cheap part. But this wouldn't qualify, I don't think, under the tracks program either, because it's not a grade, you're not separating a grade crossing.
Well, you're not eliminating a grade crossing.
Right.
The TRAX project's focus was to eliminate grade crossings.
Yeah.
And a lot of the points that Kennedy Avenue got in being awarded is the number of cars that crossed that railroad crossing.
Sure.
Here, we're looking at a zero, and, you multiply anything by zero and you know what the product is. So it's,
Well, a couple things there, though, I would wonder about, and I think I'll talk with our traffic people and see if I can back any of these up, but I'm thinking of two things. One, if this is going to be a relief valve, wouldn't we really be taking some east-west, is there east-west at-grade crossings that we would be reducing the number of crossings, even
Yeah.
though that's not at this crossing?
that would definitely be a positive, yes, Main
Yeah.
Street.
Yeah, I think
then the other thing
we're making assumptions, and we don't know for sure unless we ask, in
Yeah.
terms of NERC and NDOT, and even at the federal level, in terms of funding. So I don't want to, use assumptions on what may or may not happen and an assumed timeline until we apply it, right? Does that make sense logically, to kind of see what the reaction is, see what the response is?
Yeah.
And then see in reality what we're dealing with.
Right.
Why
The
can't
other
we-
point I
Why can't we
wanted-
cross that grade? Like Main Street then? Isn't that a whole lot cheaper? It's just fill at that point.
They won't, you mean put a grade crossing in?
Yeah.
That'd probably be pretty expensive too, because the tracks are, 23 feet in the air.
I doubt it would be as expensive as the bridge, though.
That would be just as expensive as
It
going under
wouldn't
it.
be as expensive as
I
the
don't think it
bridge.
would be
It
as
can't
expensive. I think
No.
you're
just
right,
dirt.
there's a lot of earthwork, but
There's a lot of
earthwork's a lot cheaper than
But I don't think
then,
they'd give you a grade crossing on that.
maintaining train traffic while building a bridge. Yeah. One thing I wanted to bring up, and I'm not sure how well this would play with the MPO, but several years ago, 10 years ago, we did a very similar roadway down near State Road 37 and US 50 in Bedford. And we constructed a new roadway in Bedford, and one of the ways that we got convinced NDOT to provide LPA funding was we actually showed them that it helped the US 50 and State Road 37 intersection, which was very congested. And it was a relief valve, and it was one of the ways we got funding. Now, you've got the additional step of you're not getting your funding straight from NDOT, so you've got to get it from the MPO, and that makes that argument a little less weighty, but it is a positive that, like you said, this is a relief valve. And I think we've looked at a pretty broad area in our study. We might be able to show that that we're a relief valve for US 41.
Which is a major traffic headache.
Yeah.
So anything we can do is beneficial. But I mean, I'd love to see if we were only talking 2 to 4 trains a day, and Main Street seems to be not a problem with the at-grade crossing, and it saves us, whatever, millions of dollars going at grade, then we ought to at least consider it and see what the cost difference is and how many trains are actually crossing every day. Because
I agree with you 100%. I mean, we don't know until we look
4
into it
lanes
and
across
ask.
there,
Right.
just like Main Street.
My experience with the railroads, though, is that they often, if you open a new crossing, they want you to give one up somewhere else. I did that in Newcastle, where we built a new road in Newcastle, and they wanted Newcastle to give up 2 crossings. This was CSX, but they wanted them to give up 2 crossings for the new one, which they were willing to do because they had some much lower volume streets that they closed for this new, essentially the same thing, a bypass. Same thing, they had a north-south railroad they had limited number of crossings across, and they wanted a new one on the north side of the city, and so they gave up 2 local streets for that one. I get the impression, looking at the maps and reading the report that Andrew wrote before me, that you don't have a lot of crossings to give up.
I don't think we have any.
No, probably not.
But I just want to point that out, that might be a risk, that they would come back and Norfolk Southern would come back with that.
We'll give up the junction crossing.
Now, I mean, the difference was too, this is 4 trains per day, and the one I'm talking about in Newcastle was 26 trains per day. So it was a much heavier traveled line.
We're definitely not that high.
I mean, I think the selling point would have to be the relief of traffic it's an unbelievable number that would probably get relieved, even if we had an at-grade crossing.
Yeah,
And like Caleb said, when you only have 4 trains a day, we go through that on Main Street now, which is just quarter of a mile north of there,
I've never been stopped on Main Street. I go down
Not
that
me
road all
either.
the time. But that's not going to be a persuasive measure to the railroad. They don't give a crap about relieving US 41 and the traffic on that route. They're only looking at our traffic, we don't want to be delayed or have accidents and intersection issues. And we're planning on putting a bike path across it, they're not going to be happy. Or a walking path across it, they're probably not going to be happy. I don't know.
You could go with that, amenity.
They don't seem to get too upset about that, in my experience. I mean, for how wide this is, you would just drop the gate across both.
Yeah.
And then what I've seen in limited, not every time, but in limited, I've seen where they just put a little gate on the other side. Because, the gates are staggered. So on the other side, they just drop a little gate there for the bike path.
That's what we did
only.
at 213th, right?
Changes your grade too, to beat ADA, you gotta have a gentler grade,
Yeah.
which can, because we did that, we dropped it on the Kennedy one, not only to save some of the cost of the overpass, but it also allowed us to increase the grades, which shortened the spans of everything.
Well, we could definitely add that as a fourth option in the study and cost that out for you. I mean, that's not that much work for us to do. We do roadway conceptual costs all the time, so.
And I'd love to hear your thoughts in terms of how we approach it, you know, a timeline of ask who we ask, you know, versus assuming that we can't do something before we actually get an answer, whether we can or not. Could use your help there with some direction. You know, with the railroad, do we do things concurrently? Should we clear things with the railroad first? I mean, I'm just thinking out loud here.
Well, I just want to review where the funding mechanism is, because I'm hearing Jim, Jeff, I'm sorry, Jeff, so you're gone a while, I forget your name, that we probably are not going to get any funding from NERC. Is that correct? Or is that the assumption?
I would say that,
We won't know without trying.
I wouldn't know unless we point out the project and do the NOFA submittal next time they have a NOFA. I do know that Bob is interested in submitting an intersection improvement at 77th and 41 in the next NOFA as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so say we assume that NERC is going to do something for us. What is the percentage you think that they will do for us out of this?
Like I say, the maximum that we could qualify in a one-year period would be 6 million.
For 6 million?
We're looking at estimates, not paying attention to the inflation factor that's going on. We're looking at estimates of between 11 and 20 million. So we would be looking at a minimum of 50% local funds. Probably closer to 75% local funds.
Okay.
We can also pursue at the federal level to see what our options might be there.
That's an option.
Yeah, so I guess the point I'm making, I don't want to walk out of here with assumptions and then we don't act.
Right, or assumptions that we can't do something without
Right.
even trying.
Yeah,
The-
yeah.
The last time we got money directly from the federal government was to fund this study. That money came in what year, Bob? '09?
9 or 11, something like that.
Yeah. That was maxed out at $250,000. We have used up that budget doing all this work and producing this report over the years. We would be looking at funding that locally as well if we do any additional engineering in this regard. There's no federal money left to use on this, just a few dollars left.
I thought this was closed.
It is.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
This actual study is closed, this is it. This is the closeout of this scoping report.
That's what I assumed.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm kind of concerned about what the dollar amount is that we would be responsible for about. Because I think that's going to be a very determining factor whether it's going to fly or it's not.
I think we look into every possible funding mechanism, including at the federal level. And then depending on what that answer is, if it's zero or if it's X amount, then we'll know what we're on the hook for as a town, whether or not we can complete this or not. But we need to really look into this, you know, very positively and approach every single option that we can, and then get the answer, and then just, you know, respond accordingly or adjust, pivot, you know, how we need to.
We, you know, I don't know how much you know about AECom, but we're a very large company. We're international. We're big in the United States too. So there's some people that know a lot more about the new bill than I do. Let me pick their brains too and get back with you
Please.
and see if they, because there's a lot of stuff in this bill that wasn't in previous bills. It's much more far-ranging. There's wider funding sources outside of just highways and bridges like it used to be traditionally rooted towards. So let me pick their brains, because I know that we've got some folks nationally that's what their focus is understanding how this bill is going to be applied. And what I've told you in this meeting today is what I've learned from them, but I can pick their brains directly, call them up on Teams and ask them some questions to see if I can come up with any
Yeah, we can
ideas.
provide all of our email addresses as well with,
Yeah.
town staff, so we're all seeing it real time.
Going to be on us.
Does the MPO allow you to pre-position it all? I mean, for lack of a better term, like Indianapolis MPO, for example, you can kind of go in and do your dog and pony show and kind of pitch. Before you do the actual application, you can sit down with them and pitch your project. Do they allow anything like that?
We work with the financial people at NERC one-on-one as we're submitting a project.
Okay.
It goes before the group typically over a 2-3 month period
Okay. So it's kind of the same thing.
at committee level.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds the same as in the Indianapolis MPO then.
Are we allowed to have Ben look at the, at-grade crossing?
Sure, they could evaluate that. That was not, the original project and the scoping was for grade separation at this crossing. I don't know what's involved in trying to do a grade crossing. I don't know how the railroads are, if they have to be receptive to it, or I would think you got to get them to sign off, but I don't know how you approach a grade crossing. Maybe Ben can give us a little more insight on that. I don't know.
Well, I mean, you're 22 feet up in the air there, so the biggest challenge there is going to be building up the embankments. There's going to be a lot of dirt work. Other than that, those are costs that we do all the time. Railroad gates, drop gates,
Oh, yeah.
all that kind of stuff is stuff we cost out all the time.
Well, my
It
question was more.
wasn't in our original scope for the study, but I'm willing to throw it in as an alternative and throw in a few paragraphs to discuss it. I'm not worried about what it'll cost us.
How is the railroad, are they receptive to at-grade crossing? Because,
Well, as I said before, my experience has been in other cities is that they want you to give up one if you're going to add a new one.
maybe we can
That's
get one up
typical,
in St. John.
but this is a much lower volume
Yeah, there's
line
not much volume
than
here
I've dealt with
anymore.
before. The other ones I've talked, like I said, it was 26 trains per day, so that was a very high traveled line.
In 2017, there were 10 trains.
All year?
Per day.
Oh, 10 per day.
Per day.
I was gonna say, I dealt with a line up near State Road 912 that was like 4 trains a month, but 10 a year would be low.
Yeah, you'd think 10 a year, they wouldn't even keep the line open.
Yeah.
Be pretty specialized. Yeah, that'd be interesting to see, because it was never explored at grade. That might be a cost-effective alternative, especially if it has to be funded internally.
Well, the other thing, Bob, you know this, but we weren't, like you said too, Norfolk Southern wasn't willing to look at this because they've just got limited resources in their engineering department. But we have national master services agreements with Norfolk Southern. We do work for them directly. Mostly it's inspection work, so when somebody's building a project like this, they'll hire us to go out there and watch or do part-time inspection. But I can use those contacts to kind of bounce this idea of them, because I can't talk to Norfolk Southern directly, but I can talk to people who work with them all the time and know what they're thinking, and we can confirm our suspicions as to whether they'll be receptive to it or not.
I think that would be a good first step.
Yeah.
Get an idea what grade
I
crossing,
agree.
so you'd have a cost comparison at least.
Yeah, there's a gentleman out of our Pittsburgh office that we work with in Indiana when they need inspection, and I'll reach out to him. He's the one who manages our national contract with Norfolk Southern,
Thank you, Ben.
so.
That's a great idea.
Good presentation, good information. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Anything else?
That's it.
No?
Thank you.
No other comments? Good. Okay, then, staff, any comments?
No.
No?
I think I think looking at an alternative for at-grade crossing could be cost-effective if it's doable. You know, it's, you know, running under, separating it, especially if there's limited trains going through there. You know, and I agree with Caleb, you know, that very rarely do you see a train on those tracks. I mean, I hear them more at night than I experience them. But maybe that's because I'm usually at home at night.
I've got to look at my records too. When we did that trestle landscaping project, there was a contact we reached out to that pales in comparison with what we're trying to do here. But that was a pretty good contact to have, and I'll see if I've got that in my contacts.
Yeah, maybe we could get current data on what the traffic is on that line.
That would be helpful too.
You know, especially, you know, if they were a main supplier of coal to the generating plant, and they're phasing out
Shutting that
coal
down, right.
over the next, you know, I think it was by 2030, you know, they want to phase that coal out completely. So they're, you know, that may reduce the traffic going to the future, because my fear has always been that if we built some type of a bridge there, you know, we'd have the same thing where Munster had, where now they're down to one train a day after that investment. And on the 45th one, that's down to one train a day. You know, it was a lot more when the project was conceptualized versus when they actually completed it. You know, either that or we'd finish and they'd abandon the line, and we'd have the most expensive bike bridge in the area.
I'll tell you what scares me is that 9 or 11 years ago or something like that, we got funding to do a study about this road, and we're just now talking about it and looking at the reports. And then we're talking about NERPC funding that's going to possibly come in 2030 to try and build this thing. We're talking about a project that is now from conception to possible construction 20-something years in the making. And traffic is already terrible on 41. So if we're really looking at a relief valve, personally, I think we ought to be looking at how do we get funding in the next 2 years. And if there isn't any funding, then we got to figure out a cost-effective method to just do this on our own. That's my opinion, because I don't know that, you know, I understand that getting free money from NERPC is great, but if it delays the project 10 years or 12 years in order to get $6 million possibly, it's going to cost us $6 more million easily in construction, likely, and property acquisition, waiting the 10 years for the money. This is the same scenario that we're going through with Kennedy Avenue, where we probably could have built that bridge over the railroad tracks 10 years ago for $5 million, and now we're looking at paying $5 million out of pocket for our portion, when we thought we were getting a great deal, you know, 10 years ago when we talked about building the Kennedy Avenue Bridge. So I don't know if delaying benefits us with 7.5% inflation and outrageous construction costs going up. So if
Yeah.
we really need it, we ought to just look at building it.
Well, I think we need to find out, like I said, where our funds are going to be. If we're going to bond it, what is it going to cost our taxpayers?
I 100% agree.
You know, that's the big question.
100% agree.
With that, there's nothing else?
Anybody else?
No? Anything from the audience? Anything from the floor? No? Hearing none, then this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.